With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
And good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. Welcome to the program. As always, I'm your host, Caleb Colquitt, and it is a pleasure to be with you on this Thursday. Last show of the week, well, except for the Geek-In, but we're still kind of working on that one. Nonetheless, great to be with you, whether you're joining us on YouTube, Facebook, the terrestrial signal, whatever. We got a lot to get to. We're going to go ahead and get to it right now, and as we have done since the beginning of this shutdown and everything going on with the virus, we start with the Alabama coronavirus update. Here is the latest from the Alabama Department of Public Health. So if you'll go ahead and look at the statistic, you can see there that there are 5,816 confirmed cases across the Yellowhammer State. Total tested 32,865. Now that one is absolutely fascinating. We're going to get to that in just a second. The COVID-19 deaths, which you will also notice that they used to have it split up into reported deaths and confirmed deaths. Now they're only using confirmed deaths, which frankly I think is smart. I think that it makes a lot more sense to do it this way, just because when it comes to measuring the deaths, you'll notice that if you've been watching the show and watching my updates, I've only been using the confirmed deaths anyway, because the other one, that's just maybe they are, maybe there aren't, but that's really a basically completely useless statistic, and so it makes sense that they move to just having the confirmed deaths. And then we also have 768 statewide hospitalizations, so there's quite a bit there to take in. We're going to break it all down. Oh, it looks like Brent Missildine is watching. Hey, good to have you with us. Thank you for tuning in. Now, there's a lot to digest, a lot to take in from those stats, but I think we need to sort of break them down individually before we really have a full grasp and understanding of what all of them mean. So, with the confirmed cases, this one's really interesting because it's not interesting. Oddly enough, the thing that we have to bring up is that really nothing has changed much. There's nothing wildly out of the ordinary for this one. And originally when we saw that there was an increase in your average daily gain, that was something that was a little startling, but it's kind of gotten to a new rhythm, as it were, which is not necessarily a good thing because that new rhythm is higher than the old rhythm, which you can actually tell from this second graph here. Now, if you'll go ahead and check this one out. I think looks like I've actually made a mistake here. Let me go back. There we go. Okay, so this is the new cases in the state of Alabama. You'll notice that the pattern remains roughly the same, just strangely higher. And today's day for new cases hasn't been wildly out of the norm, but that's not wildly out of the norm for the past few days. It is at a higher increase, and it looks like we're seeing what you could classify as a new normal for daily cases in the state of Alabama. So that's an odd one, but it's really not something that is much different than we've been reporting for the past couple of days. And because of that, I don't really see that this is something that has changed much. The only thing that is a little disheartening is that we're seeing an increase in how many we're gaining by the day, which means a larger percentage of Alabama's population is going to be having this on a daily basis if this trend continues to be the normal. And that's disconcerting for a number of reasons. One thing, and we'll probably touch on this in just a second with some of the other statistics as well, One thing that is a little bothersome is that originally Alabama was projected to be one of the earliest states open because for whatever reason, Alabama just had its stuff together. And I don't necessarily attribute all of that to government action. I attribute it to the people. It seemed like the people of Alabama were the ones that were voluntarily quarantining. They were the ones that were keeping the rate down by not going out. And because we just had a much lower percentage of our overall population compared to our neighboring states and compared to other states, because we had that a lot lower than we originally believed that we had, then that was something that really made a big difference. And that was one of the reasons that out of all of the different states and the different projections that they had for when they would peak and when they would be able to open up, Alabama had one of the earliest ones starting on May the 4th. And considering that we have a new recent trend, and this trend has only happened in the past 3 days, where we're seeing significant daily average increases for our confirmed cases and also for our deaths, that does not bode well, and that may get adjusted pretty quickly. We can't say that for sure. Normally, I've chalked these things up, and in the past, history has shown that these increases are short-term and they don't set a trend. But looking at the past 3 days, unless we've had 3 days in a row worth of flukes, which seems possible but not likely, then probably what is going on here is what we are seeing is a new trend, and a trend that is not good because it causes our numbers to increase. Now, this is even more concerning because even if everything else remained relatively normal, that would still be a problem. What is more concerning is all of that in light of the next statistic that I'm going to show you, because you may have noticed when I showed you the update that something was amiss. And if you did, good for you, because you picked up on it probably quite much faster than most people did. This is our total number of tested in the state of Alabama. You notice something really odd about this, because this isn't new daily tests. This is just total number of testing. Somehow we went from yesterday being about 45,000-ish, or sorry, close to 50,000. We went from almost 50,000, I think it was about 49,800, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going off of memory from yesterday. To today, not so much. We lost roughly a third of those who we had tested. Now, what does that mean? Because it's not like we tested people and then somehow they became untested. That's not a thing. So what the heck happened to our numbers? And as I'm sitting here, I really wish that I had a good answer for you, but I don't. And I am just, frankly, flabbergasted at exactly what happened here and why this is the case. But just looking at it and based on some of the things that we've heard, there were some projections, oddly enough. There were some projections that the reason what you're seeing right there with a weird just big dip off in the number of testing, there were some projections that some of the numbers were wrong, but we were talking about confirmed cases in that story, and we were also talking about false positives instead of negatives. That had nothing to do with the amount of testing, and it would have meant that it was actually lower, not higher. So this is completely unrelated to that. Somehow there was an issue with the records, I'm guessing, or somebody reported a bunch of tests that it turns out that didn't actually happen. But either way, when the Alabama Department of Public Health, in conjunction with Johns Hopkins, who helped put this whole thing together, whenever they were looking at the testing, something was amiss or something was wrong, which means we have a significant, not a little bit, we have a significant drop-off in the number of tested that we thought we originally had. Now, that is a problem for a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously, it's since we're wanting more data and we're wanting to maximize the amount of tests that we have been able to conduct, that's obviously bad just on its surface. But the deeper level of this, and the thing that is far more concerning to me, and the thing that I am really worried about, is this means that we are having these increases despite having less people tested. And if we're having a smaller portion of our population tested, and we're having the same increases and the same levels of new cases and deaths and so on and so forth that we had beforehand, that means that there's probably a whole bunch of people out there that have not been tested that also have it. And that means that we don't have nearly the handle on it that we thought. Remember that when we did a comparison, both nationwide, comparing Alabama to the national average, and compared to the neighboring states around us, when we did that comparison, Alabama did not do well on testing. Alabama was not one that was exactly excelling when it came to the amount of testing that they were doing, and that was a couple of weeks ago. Well, now we've had all these gains, and we look at it and it's been rolled back, which means Alabama is probably significantly worse on testing than we originally believed it to be. So considering that we were, I believe, 45th, and now it looks like our testing was even worse than we thought, that probably moves us down to, if not the bottom, darn close to the bottom. And so this is something that is of legitimate concern. I'm worried about it, and it's something that bothers me. I get that it's not necessarily something to panic, because you would like to think that the vast majority of people that were actually symptomatic did come in. But this means a surprising, I would even say staggering amount of Alabama's population has not been tested for this thing. Now, maybe it legitimately is. This is a possibility. Maybe it legitimately is because we just have less people with the coronavirus, which means we have less people that are symptomatic. And so maybe that's the reason. Maybe that's the rationale. It's hard to say, but that is a distinct possibility. Hopefully that is what is actually going on, but it remains to be seen. Now, we'll go ahead and look at one more statistic before we end our update for today. This one is overall deaths, which there is actually some good news. Obviously, it's never good news that any person died, so I want to make sure that you understand me correctly on that. I'm not saying that it's good that we only had 19, but 19 considering that for the past 2 days we broke the record for single-day deaths, originally 31, and then we broke it again the next day, yesterday, at 34, and the fact that today we only had 19 means we're at least trending in the correct direction. Obviously, if you're looking at the stats today on that graph, they're higher than they were yesterday because we had 19 more, but relative to the gain that we saw over the past couple of days, 19 deaths is actually somewhat moving in the right direction, and so let's hope that is the case. But looking at the fact that over the past 3 days, we have had a significant, I don't want to call it a spike, because we're not seeing that exponential spike that experts were predicting, something where we double or triple our rates of having confirmed cases in a single day. That's not what's going on. We're not seeing a spike that puts us in any kind of significant danger. However, one thing that it does do, and I'm sure that there are other experts looking at this as well, they've got to be looking at Alabama's increase, especially over the past 2 days, where we're having significantly more deaths than we have throughout this thing. We have significantly more confirmed cases, and we also have significantly less tests than we originally thought that we did. If I'm the experts and I'm looking over that if nothing else gives me pause and says, okay, we need to reevaluate when Alabama may be good to open back up. And as I've said from the beginning, and I've remained consistent, I oppose the shutdown measures just as a matter of personal liberty. I think that people should actually stay in their houses and be safe and follow all the guidelines. I just think that they should be suggestions. So I'm talking about this from the standpoint of when people ought to start returning to normal life, not when the government says to. I'm looking at this personally, and I'm saying, all right, we need to hold off at least for a few more days to see if this trend is something that's staying, or we just had 3 really bad days. That's a possibility. It's possible we just had 3 back-to-back really bad days, and it's all going to blow over, and we're going to be back to pretty low here in the next few days. Maybe that's the case, not sure, but we don't have enough data to determine whether it is or not yet. And until we have at least, I would say, 2 or 3 more days, and the weekend also makes that more difficult. But unless we have at least a few more days of data, we really need to back off. And the message I think this sends to everybody is, of course, not to panic or go out and buy 1,000-gallon drum of toilet paper or whatever. I know it doesn't come in drums, but whatever. That's really not the message here, but the message is, all right, we need to wait and see, and we need to be in a holding pattern and be a little extra cautious until we find out maybe if this thing is worse in Alabama than we thought. So that really would be my takeaway of it for the day. Now, we do have a special treat for you. My own congregation, the Dalraida Church of Christ, had delivered some personal protective equipment, the PPEs, in other words, face mask, gloves, that kind of thing, and recognized by some of the local news. They sent that off to New York where it was badly needed, and I have an interview with the person that was behind this, the person that helped orchestrate the whole thing, a very good friend of mine, been on mission trips with him, Will Tucker, the youth minister at Dalraida, and that interview is coming up in just a second. I love stories of people doing good things and helping other human beings, especially in times like this, in times of crisis. And that's the story that we're going to bring to you in just a second when we come back.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. Today we actually have 2 readings from the SJW Bible dealing with the origins of life. The first one comes from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1, verses 4 through 8. And it reads, "Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. Though to be clear, that does not mean that you were a person before birth. At that point, you were merely a clump of cells that I didn't care about. Then I said, Alas, Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak because I am a youth. But the Lord said to me, Do not say, I am a youth. Just speak from the heart, saying whatever you feel in the moment. And don't let anyone tell you you're wrong. Your youth is great because anyone over 30 is backward and out of touch anyway, and probably supports the patriarchy. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you from the bigoted old white men, declares the Lord." Our second reading of the day will come from Psalm 139, 13 through 16. "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb, even though I was not human until birth. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made through billions of years of theistic evolution. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you, when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth with my fish ancestors. Your eyes have seen my unformed gender-neutral substance, and in your iPad were written all the days that were ordained for me, that I might become an actual person when born, so that I could fulfill my goal of protesting fossil fuels. But if my gender-neutral parental unit had decided to exercise her right to end her pregnancy to stop that, I totally respect it." Wow, so inspirational. This has been another reading of the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
And welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tactics. And we do have a special guest up next, Will Tucker, who is the youth minister at the Dalraida Church of Christ. They were recently featured in the news for helping some people that were in need up in New York City with personal protective gear, which of course is absolutely crucial for healthcare workers and people on the front lines in this crisis. And so we go now to Will Tucker. How you doing, Will?
Hey, Caleb, how are you? I'm doing great.
Doing great. It's good to hear from you. And for those of you who don't know, just full disclosure, Will's actually a good personal friend of mine. We go to the same congregation and worship together there. So Will, I did want to go ahead and get into and give everybody the backstory in case they haven't read some of the coverage that's gone on it. Exactly what all happened here and how did it come about?
Sure. Brandon Hardman's a good friend of mine. We grew up together, went to school together, middle school to high school. And we've kind of stayed in touch ever since we both kind of went our separate ways after high school. Brandon is a critical care nurse at Princeton in Birmingham. And when the governor Cuomo of New York asked for nurses to basically volunteer and come and help with the COVID crisis in New York, Brandon and his wife talked it over, and they decided that it would be good for him to go. And so he took the journey there towards the end of March and arrived towards the end of March in actually Harlem Hospital in New York. And he has been working there since the end of March up until now.
Right.
And Brandon's a really interesting guy. Brandon's always been a very outgoing individual, a really good leader as well. As a matter of fact, as he's working at Harlem Hospital, he is in charge of 147 nurses on his staff. He does the staffing for the nurses, and nurses will come in. He'll have new nurses that come in every week, it seems like. They switch in and out. And he is going to be there until the month of June. Just found that out yesterday when I was talking with him. Okay. And so to say all that, how we got involved was I saw on Facebook where he was headed up to New York, gave him a call and asked how things were going. We still have a great relationship where we can talk. Anytime we want to pick up the phone, we'll just pick up the conversation, it seems like. And about 3 weeks ago when I called him for the first time, he told me that I just asked him, how are things going? And he says that the news is correct, what's coming out of New York. It's a very sad situation. And he says, I said, well, how are you doing personally? Because more than anything, I want to check on him personally because that would take a toll on him. He has been working 3 weeks straight and works 12-hour shifts at night. So basically 21 days on, and he'll get a few days off after that. So it's basically work and sleep. And 3 weeks ago when I first talked to him, Brandon was telling me that about their supplies. I'd heard rumors and seen the news reports about supplies running low, and he said all that was true. At Harlem Hospital, they were doing the best they could. There were so many patients at one time, he says they literally had to spray down their mask at night and reuse them the next day. The gloves, they had to wash the gloves and reuse them. After every patient they treated, they'd have to go and just wash their gloves and soap. And they were lacking on face shields, masks, and gloves, and gowns. And so what I did was Dalraida Church of Christ, there's a man there named John Cackleman. He's one of our in-house missionaries, and John's a great individual. Me and you both went on mission trip with him to Ukraine before.
Right. We did that last year, yeah.
Yeah, great trip. And so John is very involved in benevolent aid, and reached out to John and asked him, do we have any PPE equipment? I've got a good friend of mine that could really use it, him and his nursing staff.
Right.
And John said, we've got stuff ready to go on pallets now. And so me and him boxed up about 3 weeks ago, boxed up about 7 big boxes of face shields. We had gloves and we had gowns, and sent them to Brandon and his staff. And I will share a picture with you real quick of Brandon and his staff.
Go ahead.
You can see. This is Brandon. He is on the bottom row. He is in the gray sweatshirt, and he is the redheaded guy. That's my good friend Brandon. And so this is the nursing staff. He helps coordinate each week and gets them running as smooth as possible there at the hospital. When he reached out to me, he said, we're running low on supplies. And so we boxed up 7 big boxes of PPE products, and we shipped them to him, and they arrived about a week after we talked. And he has been distributing those products, those supplies with his staffing unit throughout the week. He said really on the weekends where we needed it the most. And I've got a couple more pictures. I think you can see these better. We'll try it one more time here. So these are actual staff members, and you can see, if you can see in the picture, they all are from all over the United States. Each person on his staff, 147 nurses, have answered the call to volunteer. And this is them being seen with the products we were able to give them. And so they wanted to reach out and say thank you, and wrote a nice letter that we'll share with the congregation a little bit later once we're all back together. But Brandon is working hard. He just signed up to stay throughout the month of June to work at Harlem Hospital. And he has He said the experience has been very eye-opening, but at the same time, he sees that there is a great need and that he was glad to answer the call to help.
Well, I think that just, and you know this because a lot of people at home may not realize this, but I know this because I've known you for a long time. I've been Will's friend for a while, and I know him, and I know his family, and his wife is actually in healthcare as well. And I think just to, and you can speak to this, of course, to get into that profession in the first place, you just kind of have to have a heart for people. And I think based on what you're telling me with the fact that he was willing to go up there and put himself in harm's way, even though that wasn't where he normally works, and the kind of work that he and the other nurses and the staff have put in, I think it really does just kind of show that that's just the kind of people most nurses are.
Yes, I tell you, they have a heart of gold. I think about my wife as well. She loves what she does. You know, being able to she takes care of the children in the nursery and the babies. She loves it. And when I spoke to Brandon, I said, you know, what made you want to go? He said, you know, there are some student loans and debts I want to pay off, but he said, above all, these people need our help. Mm-hmm. He says, I just felt like I could do this and I could help out. And he said, I had the experience to help lead a crew like this of nurses. And so I volunteered. And that's just Brandon. That's how he's always been. Mm-hmm. He's ready to jump in and help in at moment's notice. He does weigh in the factors of what could happen. But I'll tell you this stat. When I talked to him on Monday, he said out of the 147 nurses he has, none have tested positive for the virus.
That's
I thought
incredible.
That was just incredible.
Yeah.
I thought that was also a testament to the power of prayer. He prays daily. He prays with his nurses. It's just incredible to think that they are staying as healthy as they can while they're there.
Well, and hopefully part of that is the protective equipment that's been donated by the Dalraida Church of Christ and hopefully other places as well. So, you know, that's a big part of it. And if there's anything that we can do here, we've got to protect the people that are out there on the front lines, like Brandon and like your wife and like our other healthcare professionals, because the whole point of doing the shutdowns and flattening the curve and everything, the whole point of that was to make sure that we didn't get overwhelmed and that our hospital staff didn't all get sick at the same time to where they wouldn't be able to take care of others. So, you know, that's just such an instrumental part to this whole equation.
That's true, Caleb. He did tell me when I talked to him on Monday, he said with the lockdown taking place in New York, things have really gotten better. He said the number of patients have gone down. He said the number of deaths have gone down. He said it's been really good to see the virus has seemed to slow there, and people are not as panicked as they were once before.
Well, that is fantastic news, because I know in New York it was nowhere near the levels that we've seen in like Italy and Spain and China, but it still was really bad for a couple of weeks, and hopefully since we're seeing it sort of calm down and people have been able to somewhat start returning to, you know, some semblance of normalcy, I guess is the best way that we can say it, and probably the best that they can hope for right now. So just to give us an idea exactly how much of this stuff was donated, because I haven't seen any exact figures. I mean, was it just a couple pallets or what?
We had one whole pallet, and within the boxes you had packs of glove. I think we packed in, I would say, several thousand pairs of gloves. And also we had a lot of drapes they could wear, basically the gowns they could wear, and several face shields we were able to send. There were 7 large boxes that we sent through UPS, one whole pallet, you could say, that went and arrived there about a week later. Brandon told me that this would be able to help staff his nurses for the next couple of weeks, and that's with them working each and every night 7 days a week. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, that gives you a better idea of the scope and how much was sent. Now, I probably have a pretty good idea of the answer to this question, because you and I both work with Dalraida and on their missionary supplies and some of the humanitarian aid that we do for other countries. But just give the audience a little idea of some of the stuff that Dalraida normally does and the reason that they had some of this personal protective equipment on hand.
Sure. John Kalkman, he'd be the great one to talk to on your show at some point. John Kalkman helps oversee the humanitarian aid efforts for the Church at Dalraida, and he does such a good job. He's very involved with sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine, also to Tanzania. On Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, we are loading two 53-foot trailers that we will send to New Jersey. That is going to have several pallets, and I say several, about 35 to 40 pallets worth of PPE products, some hospital beds, linens, and things like that will be sent to them. And the way John, I asked him the other day, I said, John, how do we get all this equipment here? He said it's by word of mouth. Some companies are about to throw things out, or they don't want to use them anymore. And what's interesting about that, we have a big warehouse full of this stuff. And now we're working with FEMA on this order to New Jersey that we're about to ship on Tuesday. And we're able to send supplies over to Ukraine, Tanzania, to villages and communities that are really in need.
Well, you know, I think that a lot of churches, and one of the reasons I'm so proud to be a member of Dalraida and be a part of that family, is I think a lot of churches, they make the mistake of leaning too much into one or the other. And what I mean by that is they make the mistake of only being concerned about places that are way far off, and then some will make the mistake of only doing sort of humanitarian aid and benevolence here stateside or around their area. And I mean, the call in the gospel is both. You need both. You take care of people that are far off and you do humanitarian aid there, but you also make sure you're taking care of the people, you know, just a few states over or even in your own hometown. And so I'm really, really encouraged spiritually to be able to see this and to see that the congregation has been able to help with that and that you've been a part of it. So we certainly appreciate the work that you've been doing with that congregation there.
Yeah, it's a joy. I really enjoy it. As you and I both have seen, when we went to Ukraine, the benevolent aid that had arrived there, that we were a part of, loading the trucks, we got to see it being distributed. It's just a joy to see and to help people.
I will say it's a little bit surreal to be loading pallets onto a truck in America, and then you get to Ukraine and you see that same equipment. You're like, hey, I loaded that.
Yeah.
It's a really weird feeling. But
I've seen those 100 so buckets I loaded on a trailer.
Yeah. I never actually did the buckets. I was always there when we were doing, you know, different pallets and hospital beds, I think was the one that I helped with. But anyway, yeah, well, Will, is there anything else that I might not have thought of that you need to let the audience know about this? Any other details that we might have missed?
As far as I know, I think we just about cover it. The big thing is
okay. So,
pray
go ahead.
For our health workers. Continue to pray for those and those essential workers, janitors, health workers, truck drivers, people like that. I tell you, they're putting their life at risk, and it seems like many are happy to do it and joyful to serve one another.
Well, I think that's part of the call in the scripture is that we take joy in helping one another. But one last thing that I would want to ask is if there is somebody out there watching this program that has maybe either some access to this information has access to this equipment or has information on somebody that might and might want to donate it and make sure it gets to somewhere where it can do some good, would they be able to contact Dalraida to do that? And if so, how would they do that?
Yeah, yes, most definitely. You can actually contact me. My email address is will@dalraida.org. Any benevolent aid you'd like to help send, especially any PPE equipment they would love to have. You can call the church office at the Dalraida Church of Christ here in Montgomery. And you can also, you could send it to our address, 3740 Atlanta Highway, Montgomery, Alabama, 36109. And John Kackelman is also a great person to contact, who is in charge of our benevolent aid that takes place at Dalraida that we send out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate what you're doing and what the Dalraida Church of Christ is doing. And I'm sure that there's other congregations in the river region that are doing the same thing. But just if you do have information on that, be sure to get in touch with them. And most importantly, Will already touched on it. I'm just going to reiterate what he said. The most important thing that we can do is all come together and pray about this and do the best that we can, because of course we do the practical things like we're talking about here where we're shipping personal protective equipment, but the most important thing is to remember to keep all of those that are especially in hot zones like New York or people that are at risk of this and putting their lives on the line to help others in this time. We need to keep those in our prayers and lift them up to our Father as well.
Well, thanks for having me on, Caleb. I really enjoyed it.
All right, I appreciate it, Will. You have a good one, brother.
You too. Thank you.
Bye. That was Will Tucker, and we'll go ahead and go to a quick break. We'll be back in just a second on Tactics.
you messed it up. You're stupid.
And for today's Daily Dose of Stupid, and it's going to be a short one because, quite frankly, I just don't need a whole lot of time to rebut this. So the other day, there was this headline that went out because, of course, as you know, Earth Day, and Earth Day being a big deal, especially to the, as Mark Levin likes to call him, who's also on News Radio 1440, the climate Nazis, the ones that go around and are convinced that somehow running our air conditioners is going to cause the planet to implode in the next 10 years or something like that, to use AOC's figures at least. Well, they're at it again. And this was a article based on a study done, and this was in The Hill. So go ahead and bring that up. You can see this latest, and there's, of course, you can go and look it up and read the article yourself, but the headline pretty much says everything that it needs to say. The Arctic will have iceless summer by the year 2050, according to a new study. Now, the funny thing about this, and really the funny thing about all of these predictions, is they almost always, it's their standard operating procedure to constantly move the goalpost. It's not as though occasionally they do it, or sometimes they come up with a model and they get it wrong, which, I mean, we've seen a lot of models get it wrong here recently. And this actually kind of goes back to something that's going on with the virus that I was having a discussion just today with a good friend of mine. One of the things that we were talking about, and he's a scientist and he deals a lot with models, and he and I were joking around because we were talking about the different models that have been incorrect. And neither one of us believe that this whole thing is a hoax or that the models are bad. The models have been wrong, and that's pretty much par for the course when it comes to science. When you're looking at a scientific model, even if it is done by somebody in good faith, even if they don't bring any bias to the table, and even if they really are a very competent expert in their field and know what they're talking about when making the models are still always wrong. Because they're models. And the thing is, models are what you make when you don't have data. There's nothing wrong with the scientist, and the models are better than nothing because they give you at least some idea of the direction where something is going, but every scientific model, just about it, winds up being wrong. And so, whether you're talking about the thing with the epidemic or you're talking about with climate change, now, this one, I think, obviously is politically motivated, and the scientists that brought this to the table are using projections that the data simply does not support, and so you could say that it's a bad model in that way, but you have to deal with some understanding that the model is going to be wrong, because that's what makes it a model. Because you make a model in the absence of data. Because if you had data, there'd be no reason to make the model. Therefore, the model only exists in a vacuum of data. And so that's what's so important to understand here when you're looking at things like this, where they're putting together a study and making a model to project what they think will happen in the future. They're pretty much always wrong. And so it's important to not just look at where they project it's going to go, but look at how they arrived at their conclusion. Was there some kind of bias? Did they have an axe to grind when it came to this? And the reason that this model, I think, is ridiculous is because we can use history as a predictor to a great degree in this particular case, because you may remember that this is not the first time somebody has predicted the Arctic would be ice-free during the summer. This was something that has been predicted many times. In fact, you can look at, it's not even a very old prediction. This is a report from the BBC that was updated last on Wednesday the 12th, December 2007. You look at the highlighted section of text there, and that's the last time they updated this thing. Arctic summers will be ice-free by 2013. Now, this tells us two things. First of all, again, scientific models, it's not that they're completely useless, but when it comes to climate change, they've been shown to be not only kind of useless, but pretty much entirely useless. I mean, they never turn out to be right. And of course, we have that advantage with hindsight. But the second thing that it tells you, and it should really be informative to us on how we observe models and projections and things that they're talking about for the future, because we're looking at this and understanding that they, in 2007, predicted that just 6 years into the future, 2013, that the Arctic was going to have an iceless summer, which of course, here we are in 2020, and we're 7 years past that and have come nowhere close to that. In fact, the Arctic actually had a record ice growth in 2015. But anyway, looking back at it, they made a prediction that 7 years later wound up not even coming close to being true. And now they're making predictions for 30 years in the future, which A, means they're even less likely to be correct because it's a prediction that is further in the future. But another thing that it should inform you on is that they're getting smarter. They're not making predictions that they'll have to answer for in the next less than a decade, because that makes them look really stupid. So now what they're doing is they're trying to project it just far enough into the future to where you should panic about it right now, but not quite so far into the future that it just, nobody worries about it. But they want it to be at least enough distance from where they are now when they're making the prediction to where everybody's going to forget that they predicted that by the time that the prediction actually comes, because they don't want you to check their work. If they did, it would prove what you already know, that they're frauds. And that's really the issue that they come into, is that they want to make these predictions and never be held accountable or never be called out for the fact that they are wildly off base. And so now what you're seeing is a lot of these projections not taking the AOC model, but instead taking a page out of a better playbook saying, well, let's make these predictions like 30 years in the future so everyone forgets that that's when we made them. All right, so I've got to get going because I'm actually teaching a Bible class here in a few minutes, and normally I could, maybe be a minute or two late, but I'm actually teaching this one, so I've got to kind of be there on time. That's going to be our show today. Sorry I couldn't work in a chaplain's report. We just ran out of time here. In the meantime, stay the course, friends. Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media, Montgomery. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media or our business partners. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Video production by Jackson Dean. Broadcast studio provided by Faulkner University. Location studio provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2020.